हाँ निखिल।
हेलो। रेडी भाई?
मैं तो रेडी हूँ, कोई आना तो चाहिए।
मैं आ गई ना सर, मैं आ गई।
थैंक यू मैम।
हमारी नेहा मैडम आ चुकी है। बाकी कैसे है? अंबेकर सर इज वेटिंग इन, कैसे ज्वाइन करो एडमिट? सर आ गए, ग्रुप पे डाल देता हूँ।
निखिल सर, अब कितने प्रोफेशनल होके बैठते हो यार।
क्या क्या?
कितने प्रोफेशनली बैठते हो यार अब।
अरे यार, होस्ट हूँ ना मैं।
अभी मैं वीडियो नहीं ऑन करती कि मैं फैल सकूं बेड पे।
मैं काम करता हूँ, तेरे को अपना पीपीटी फॉरवर्ड करता हूँ, तू कर दे प्रेजेंट।
अच्छा, वाह 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 वाह।
और क्या
सर आ गए।
आगे क्या?
ये 1+60 भी आया कोई।
We can start.
मैंग सर पता नहीं कहाँ।
निखिल ग्रुप पे डाल दे भैया, स्टार्टिंग सर आ गए।
हाँ, एक सेकंड, I'll just put it up in the group. तो शुरू कर दे स्क्रीन शेयरिंग।
अभी तो वैसे भी कोई ओवरलैप नहीं कर रहा है ना?
नहीं, आई डोंट थिंक सो। सुपरा इंटरव्यू तो खत्म हो गया रहेगा ना, मैं तो मिस किया वो। ओके, तू चालू कर दे। बाकी सबको म्यूट कर देता हूँ। कर शुरू, अपूर्व।
अच्छा, अलाउ मी टू शेयर माय स्क्रीन। दिख रहा है क्या?
दिख रहा है, मतलब खुला नहीं है अब तक।
खुला होगा यार।
नहीं, ऑप्टिक नाउ पीपीटी दिख रहा है
अभी इट्स शोइंग मी माय स्क्रीन शेयर इज पॉज्ड, आई डोंट नो व्हाई।
तेरे साइड से हुआ रहेगा।
तो मैं इसको भी ऑन कैसे करेगा?
वापस स्क्रीन शेयर देख।
ओके वेट। So I'm resuming my share. आ रहा है क्या?
वो स्क्रीन दिख रहा है बट पीपीटी नहीं खुला है अब तक।
What can you see?
ऑप्टिक नाउ पीपीटी।
1 2 3 4 दिख रहा है वो।
हेलो। हाँ
ओके
सर।
अभी
हाँ बोला ना सर।
हाँ अभी आया।
ओके सर, ओके सर।
ओके अभी आया ना?
हाँ अभी आया।
You can see the full screen.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Please start.
Good afternoon, sir. So I'll start.
Yes.
So I'll be starting on optic nerve. I'll be covering the relevant clinical and the applied anatomy, the examination part, and some operative part. So the optic nerve is basically a CNS fiber pathway, extends from the retina to the optic chiasm. Retina has 10 layers, which we all know. So the 8th layer is the ganglion cell layer, which has approximately 1.2 million ganglion cells, and the axons of each of these cells make each of the optic nerve. The optic disc is the ophthalmoscopically visible tip of the optic nerve, which we see usually on the fundoscopic examination. It's a vertical ellipse, and it constitutes a physiological blind spot. It has no receptors, neither rods nor cones. the retina is unmyelinated, the optic nerve is myelinated. So the zone of transition from myelination from unmyelinated to the myelinated segment occurs at the lamina cribrosa. As the optic nerve axon fibers pass through the lamina cribrosa, the nerve gets myelinated. So in an optic nerve, 90% fibers they arise from the macula, and the remaining 10% or the other fibers from the retina. Now, this massive projection of the macula into the optic nerve is helpful because any macular dysfunction is indirectly indicative of the optic nerve disease. So this is the most of my presentation is based on De Jongs, then partly from Breton and partly from Brussels. So this is a photograph which is given in De Jong. So I'm concentrating on this photo because it gives us a lot of information. So we come to the optic disc. I hope you can see my cursor. This is the optic disc. This is the macula. So the relation of the macula to the optic disc is that macula lies temporally or laterally to the optic disc. The distance is 2 diopters, and this relation is important because the macula is projected laterally in the visual field. This is now the dura as it comes. It joins with the Tenon's capsule, and it forms the vaginal sheath or the subdural space, exactly the subarachnoid space through which the CSF and the brain transmissions are transmitted to the globe. This is the optic nerve proper, the retinal artery, and the optic disc, the optic cup. Now this diagram shows this is the temporal, this is the optic cup which is medial, this is the macula, and this is the papillomacular bundle which maintains its integrity. It transverses the entire optic nerve as a solid bundle. It does not decussate anywhere. Only the location inside the optic nerve slightly changes, which I'll be covering later. So this relationship of the macula and the optic disc is important, and the papillomacular bundle, which constitutes more than 90% of the optic nerve. So the optic nerve proper is divided into 4 segments. The first is the intraocular part. The average length of an optic nerve is 5 centimeters. The intraocular part, the first part is the smallest segment, which is 1 millimeter, which is also known as the optic nerve head. And this optic nerve head has the optic disc, which we see on the fundus examination. The second part is the intraorbital part, which is the longest segment of approximately 2.5 centimeters. Now it is a tortuous segment which has a redundant length of 8 millimeters, and it can adjust up to a 9 millimeter of proptosis. This is the only safeguard the optic nerve has in case of a proptosis. The third segment is the intracanalicular part, which is 9 millimeters or approximately 1 centimeter. Now this lies inside the optic canal and is the most fixed or the immobile part. Therefore, it is the most susceptible to any ischemic or to any torsional injury. And the last part is the intracranial part, which is approximately 1.5 centimeters. Now, this is a diagram which shows the relations of the optic nerve, the ICA, and the third nerve, along with the pituitary stalk. So this is the optic nerve of the ipsilateral. This is the sagittal section. This is the optic nerve of the ipsilateral side. The opposite side optic nerve has been sectioned. This is the optic chiasma. So here below the optic nerve lies the internal carotid artery. The ACOM lies, the anterior cerebral artery and the ACOM, it lies superior to the optic nerve. This is the infundibulum and the pituitary gland. And this is the ICA, the sphenoid sinus. Now the second image shows the chiasmal and the retrochiasmal relation of the optic nerve. So this the retrochiasmal segment here, it starts the optic tract. This is the optic nerve sheath. This is the ICA, and this is the optic strut. Here lies the third cranial nerve. Here will be the ICP, the anterior clinoid process. So while drilling of the ECP, both the optic and most of the oculomotor nerve have to be safeguarded. This is the optic strut which needs to be cut when we are dealing with the supraclinoid aneurysm or the ACOM artery aneurysm. And these are the various muscles which cover like the superior oblique, the superior rectus, which cover the optic nerve. So the basic relationship which we have to understand between the optic nerve, the ICA, the ACA, your voice is breaking. Hello. The voice is breaking. Hello. Shall I continue? Hello.
Apurva,
Yeah, continue.
continue.
Okay, fine. I'll continue. So now we move to the arrangement of the nerve fibers within the optic nerve. So the arrangement of the nerve fibers follow the arrangement of the retina. There's a retinotopic correlation between the optic nerve and the retinal fibers. The arrangement is both in spatial and in temporal fields and the topical fields. So we'll just concentrate on this image, which is self-explanatory. So this part is the papillomacular bundle, which I said maintains its integrity throughout the optic nerve. Now, this is the proximal part, which is near the eye, the first image, and the second is the distal optic nerve, which is near the chiasma. So near the eye, the papillomacular bundle is located slightly inferiorly and temporally. And as the bundle traverses the optic nerve, it becomes more central in location. The upper temporal and the upper nasal fibers, the lower temporal and the lower nasal fibers, they maintain the superior and the inferior quadrants. The nasal fibers lie nasally and the temporal fibers lie temporally. So as each eye gives the nasal and the temporal fibers. As the fibers traverse, the temporal fibers, they do not decussate, they cross on the same side, and all the nasal fibers, they cross to the opposite side. So first of all, we'll just concentrate on the central image because this shows the normal visual pathway, the left and the right eye. So we'll concentrate on the left eye only. Now the fibers in red are the nasal fibers, which completely decussate and travel to the opposite side. The temporal fibers, they do not decussate and they travel to on the same side. This is the optic nerve, which starts from the optic disc and reaches up to the chiasma. This is the chiasma. This is the optic tract, the lateral geniculate body, and the nucleus. Now these are the optic radiations, which travel and reach to the olfactory lobe or the primary olfactory area 18 and 17. So now there are two anatomical entities which you need to understand. One is the Willebrand's knee, and the second is the Mayer's loop. So we'll concentrate on the upper image first, when I'm pointing with my cursor. Now this is nothing but the optic radiations which arise from the lateral geniculate body and go to the occipital lobe. Now these are the Mayer's loop. So these are nothing but the inferior retinal fibers which extend inferiorly into the temporal lobe, above the temporal, above the temporal part of the third ventricle. So any involvement of these loops, the Mayer's loop, these are nothing but just the inferior retina. Any involvement of these loops results in a superior quadrantonopia, or what we call a pie in the sky. This is the Willebrand's knee. So this is the left optic nerve. This is the chiasma. This is the this is the optic tract. So as the nasal fibers cross from the left optic nerve to the right optic tract, some of these fibers project into the opposite optic nerve, and this forms the Willebrand's knee. So any affection at any of these sites leads to typical visual field effects, which we are mostly aware of. And any involvement, so all these sites have been marked. Any involvement of the retina or of the macula inside the eye, sparing the optic nerve, will result in a central scotoma. If the complete optic nerve on one side is severe, it will lead in a complete monocular vision loss. Any lesion which is affecting the retina or the optic nerve will lead to a monocular vision loss. Any lesion which is affecting the chiasma and the retrochiasmal segments will result in a bilateral vision loss, or a binocular field defect. A defect in the chiasma will lead to a bitemporal hemianopia, which is marked by C. So the optic radiations, if they are affected, they will lead to if any involvement of the optic chiasma occurs, this will result in a binocular field loss, which is heteronymous, not homonymous. So it will either cause a bitemporal hemianopia or a binasal hemianopia. Most commonly, we see a bitemporal hemianopia, as in case of a pituitary lesion. To cause a binasal hemianopia, the lesions need to compress the chiasma from both the sides, which is very rare. Unless and until there is a vascular lesion which causes compression laterally, we don't get a binasal field effect. So most commonly, we get a bitemporal hemianopia, which is depicted here. Involvement of the optic radiation will result in a homonymous hemianopic field effect on the involving of the contralateral side. So it will be either a contralateral temporal hemianopia or a nasal hemianopia. The involvement of the Mayer's loop will cause pie in the sky or a superior quadrantonopia. Fibers which have not been depicted here are the fibers of the superior retina in the parietal lobe, and involvement of those fibers results in a pie on the floor or an inferior quadrantonopic defect. So then we come to the vascular supply of the entire visual pathway. The main supply is from the ophthalmic artery, which gives the central retinal artery, and via the superior and the inferior branches, it supplies the retina. The other branches of the ophthalmic artery, along with the short posterior ciliary arteries and the choroidal vessels, they form the circle of Zinn and Haller, which supplies the optic disc. So the optic disc is very heavily in a way vascularized. Only 2 points which I need to emphasize from this slide is, first of all, that the central retinal artery does not directly supply the optic disc. So in case of a central retinal artery occlusion, the optic disc will be spared. The second is that the macula has multiple blood supplies. So therefore, a macular sparing is a common phenomena which we see, which we will be dealing later. But the blood supply to the macula is from multiple arteries. Therefore, macular sparing is a common occurrence even when the lesion occurs involving the occipital lobe. The optic chiasma and the optic tract, they get branches from the ACA, the ACOM, the PEEK. So this is a relevant anatomy which I have discussed. While coming to the clinical examination, these are the 5 heads under which I'll be discussing the examination: the acuity, the color vision, the visual field, the fundus examination, and the light reflex. So the visual acuity is the ability of the eyes to resolve the details, the fine details, and it is expressed as small d by a capital D. This I'll explain the notation later in the slide. So while performing a visual acuity, in fact, in all the examinations of the eye, each eye has to be tested individually. And for visual acuity, the room needs to be well lit. The aims of the testing are to know the difference between a near and a far vision, and what is the difference in the vision with or without correction. So when we do a visual acuity, it is always done with the corrected vision. So if the patient uses lens or if the patient is wearing a spectacles, the patient must wear them while we are testing the visual acuity. So a normal visual acuity, this is a standard chart, the Snellen's chart, which is used for a far vision, and a Jaeger, which is used for a near vision. So in the standard Snellen's chart, the distances which are marked are usually in feet. While what we use in India, we have a distance marked in meters. So this part, the line which I have highlighted in red, this is the 20 feet or 6 meters. So we do a normal visual acuity testing at a distance of 6 meters while testing for far vision. And subsequently, we can correlate with the feet and the meters. So a normal visual acuity is 6 by 6 or 20 by 20, which is attained by 5 years of age. So while using a Jaeger's chart, the chart has to be kept at a distance of 35.5 centimeters or 14 inches. So how do we actually test the vision? Initially, the patient is made to stand at a distance of 6 feet. And if he can read this line, 20 feet, which is 6 meters, then the vision is reported as 6 by 6. The small d is the 6 meters at which the patient should be able to read, which is normal. And the capital D is the distance at which the patient is actually able to read it. So when we report a vision as 6 by 6, that means the patient can read the alphabet at a distance of 6 meters, which should have been read at a distance of 6 meters, which is normal. Now, each of these letters, they subtend an angle of 5 minutes on the eye, and the horizontal of A or the cross of T's, they subtend an angle of 1 minute of an arc of the eye. So this is important, and therefore the distance of 6 meters has to be maintained. So if a patient is not able to read at the distance of 6 meters, then we correct the vision. And at a distance of 6 meters, if the patient is able to read, maybe at a maybe this line, which is 120, or maybe this line, which is 60, which is easier to explain. So 20 is 6 meters. So 80 becomes 120 meters. Oh, no, 24 meters. So the vision will be reported at 6 by 24, which means that the patient is able to read a line which should have been read at a distance of 6 meters with a corrected vision at 24 meters. Or in other words, the line which should have been read at 24 meters, the patient is able to read only at a distance of 6 meters. So this is how we keep on checking for the vision. And any vision which is worse than 6 by 240 or 20 by 800, then we have two options. Either we reduce the distance of 6 feet by 5 feet, and then we start reporting the vision as 5 by 240, or 4x240, or better still is to use the finger counting, hand movements, and light perception. The use of a pinhole test is just to eliminate any refractive errors. Multiple holes are made at a circle with a diameter of 2 centimeters, and if the vision improves with 5 to 6 holes in that centimeter in that circle of that diameter, it indicates that the vision is improving because of a refractive error. If there is no improvement in vision, the patient may has a optic neuritis, and if the vision worsens, then the patient has a cataract, because of which his vision has reduced. Now, loss of color vision and mainly red color desaturation is usually even a primary, it's a first symptom which the patient is not able to appreciate, but which can be found on clinical testing even earlier than a visual field deficit. And red color perception is usually lost first. So when we are testing for a color vision, we have to compare the right and the left eye, the nasal and the temporal quadrants, and the central and the peripheral vision. The central vision normally is better than the peripheral vision, and any reversal of this indicates a macular lesion. Similarly, if a patient is not able to, if there is a difference in the color saturation in the right and the left eye, then in the affected eye or an eye with the defective color vision, the red will be perceived as a yellow color, and gradually it passes to orange, and then it becomes colorless. So in the Ishihara chart, we have alphabets, we have numbers, and we have shapes, and we have different sizes for people who are illiterate also. So this is how a color vision is examined. Now, one of the most important examinations is of the visual field. And in visual field, we have two fields. One is the central field of vision and one is the peripheral field of vision. So the central 30 degrees constitutes the central field of vision, and the peripheral field from 30 to 90 degrees constitutes the peripheral field. So if we look at this eye, I have just mentioned the fields in all the quadrants. This is the nasal side, which has a 60-degree field of vision. This is the temporal side, which has 90 to 100 degrees field of vision. The superior is 50 to 60, and the inferior is slightly more than the superior. So we have a larger field of vision in the inferior and the temporal quadrants. Now, why we have a larger temporal field of vision than a nasal field of vision is not because of the nose blocking the vision in the nasal side. It's because the retina, the inferior retina, extends more anteriorly and peripherally in its spatial arrangement. And that is why we have a larger temporal field as compared to a nasal field. Now, the central vision is usually a macular entity and it's very sharp, while the peripheral vision is usually blurred. And where peripheral vision is more sensitive to moving objects. So that is why when we are doing a confrontation test, we slightly move the object because that is perceived better as compared to a static object. So when we are screening for a peripheral vision, we do a confrontation test. When we are screening for a central vision, we have Amsler's grid, which we usually do not use. So I'll come to the confrontation test. When we are doing a confrontation test, usually there are 2 prerequisites. The distance is again 6 meters. The eye level of the examiner and the subject should be at the same level. And whatever fingers or red colored plaques we are introducing should be at a mid-distant point. That is at the distance of 3 meters between the subject and the examiner. The red color marks or tips are used because red color is is better appreciated by the patient. And we usually start from the temporal side and do the examination in all the quadrants. If we have any doubt on the confrontation test, then we subject the patient to perimetry and we confirm the visual field deficits on the perimetry chart. A visual field defect can be of any of the 4 forms in the form of a scotoma, a hemianopia, an altitudinal defect, or a concentric constriction of the visual field. A scotoma is nothing but a blind spot with a normal surrounding vision. Our physiological blind spot is the Marriott spot, which is there on the optic nerve head at the optic disc, which is enlarged, which is one of the first, like in papillary edema, the first sign is the enlargement of the blind spot. And also in optic neuritis, it is seen. So a scotoma can be a positive scotoma or a negative scotoma. A positive scotoma is appreciated by the patient as something which has been kept in his field of vision. The patient appreciates a black spot in his visual field which cannot be removed. This is a positive scotoma which the patient can identify. A negative scotoma is one which the patient is not aware of, and that can be documented only on a visual field examination. So optic nerve diseases produce a negative scotoma, which we can document only by our examination. The patient is not aware of it. A hemianopia, all of us know, is a complete loss of vision in one meridian, either the nasal or the temporal, and they respect the vertical meridian. They never cross. An altitudinal defect is caused by vascular diseases, and they respect the horizontal meridian. They never cross from the superior to the inferior division. And last is the concentric constriction of visual fields. So as I said earlier, a monocular defect is because of a lesion affecting the retina or the optic nerve, and a binocular defect is because of a lesion which affects a chiasma or the retrochiasmal part. And any patient with an altitudinal field defect will give a history as a cut. If he has a superior altitudinal defect, he will report it as a curtain which is just hanging from above. Or for an inferior, he will complain of looking over the horizon because he cannot see anything below it. So this again is a chart of the from De Jongs of the visual field defects at various levels. I'll just look at the table for a prechiasmal, chiasmal, and retrochiasmal lesion. The vision loss in a prechiasmal is monocular, and the other two is binocular. The color vision is usually impaired in a prechiasmal lesion, which is preserved in the chiasma and retrochiasmal lesions. The field defects, if it involves retina, will be a scotoma. If it involves the optic nerve, will be a paracentral or secocentral scotoma. In chiasma, it's heteronymous, like a bitemporal or a binasal hemianopia. And in retrochiasmal lesions, it will be homonymous hemianopia. The afferent pupillary defect will be present in prechiasmal lesions, and the optic discs are usually normal, except in the prechiasmal lesions. So now we come to the optic disc. Already I've said it's a vertical ellipse, and normally it's flat and it has a yellowish pinkish hue. So the superior retinal arteries and the inferior retinal arteries, superior and the inferior central artery, they supply the optic disc. So the optic disc has two components. One is the peripheral neurotype, and the center is the optic cup. And the cup to disc ratio is important. It usually is 0.3, which is considered to be normal. A normal disc has a blurring of the nasal margin and a temporal pallor. So this normal finding is important because as we study papilledema, these relationships change, and that is how we diagnose papilledema of whatever grade is there. So the visual axis is straight, which falls on the macula to the center of the eye. When we are doing a fundoscopic examination, this is our observer angle, which falls on the optic disc, and this is what we study. This on the right is the normal optic disc, both the eyes which show the normal fundus or normal optic disc, normal macula with the normal relation of the arteries which can be seen. So papilledema is the optic disc swelling which is usually secondary to an elevated ICP, and the vision is usually well preserved in a case of acute papilledema. And usually papilledema is bilateral, and in case of acute, and if it's bilateral, it's chronic, it usually occurs within days to weeks. In acute cases, it may develop even over hours. So the mechanism of papilledema is very straightforward. Whatever subarachnoid spaces we have over the optic nerve formed by the vaginal sheaths, they transmit the raised ICP pressure over the optic nerve, which results in congestion and interruption of the exoplasmic flow. Now this congestion causes a venous engorgement, which gradually causes swelling of the optic disc. And these swollen axons have impaired venous drainage, and gradual swelling causes edema of the optic disc and elevation of the disc above the retinal surface. So this is the pathophysiology of papilledema and how the raised ICP is transmitted to the optic nerve. We know that in children, before the fontanelles close, raised symptoms of raised ICP and papilledema will not be elicited, specifically because of the open anterior fontanelle. The most common symptom of papilledema is a transient visual obscuration or graying out of the vision, which the patient reports of. Patients may have complaint of a pulsatile tinnitus. Normally, the visual acuity and the color vision is preserved. Diplopia may occasionally be seen if the sixth nerve is involved, which is a false localizing sign anyways. And there is a decreased red saturation, which an intelligent person will be able to report. Now, the signs of papilledema are early, late, and chronic. And that is how papilledema has also been graded in early full developed, chronic, and atrophic. So one of the first signs is the loss of spontaneous venous pulsations, which, if present, indicates that the ICP is more than 200 millimeters of water. And the first sign is a disc hyperemia. We can see a dilatation of the capillaries on the disc surface. The subtle edema is reported but usually not seen. If papilledema becomes prolonged, the disc becomes grossly elevated, venous congestion develops, hemorrhages and exudates, they become more easily seen, cotton wool spots may be seen, and patent lines can be seen, which are mainly seen on the retinal layer, and they have also been reported as subchoroidal but not usually seen. When it becomes chronic over months, the disc hyperemia subsides, and we have the second optic atrophy, where the disc becomes dirty gray, and all these vessels, which may be appreciated. So the stages of papilledema are early, fully developed, chronic, and atrophic, or secondary optic atrophy. The signs remain the same. In the early papilledema, there is the absence of spontaneous venous pulsations, which is disc hyperemia, and there might be blurring of the disc margins and specification of the nerve fiber, which is usually seen when we have a fully dilated eye and the fundus. The second stage is the fully developed papilledema, where there is a marked disc hyperemia with elevation of the surface. Humping of the vessels is an important sign which can be seen with obliteration of the disc margins, and hemorrhages and cotton wool spots are usually seen in a fully developed papilledema. In chronic papilledema, characteristic appearance of the disc has been reported where hemorrhages and exudates have already the central cup is completely obliterated. And last is the secondary optic atrophy, in which we see a pale disc with a dirty gray optic cup, and as opposed, this needs to be differentiated from primary optic atrophy, which we'll come to later. Now, Frisson has graded papilledema into 6 grades, stage 0 to stage 5, which frequently asked in the exams. So there are lots of descriptions for each stage. I have just mentioned the ones which are need to be remembered. A stage 0 is a normal optic disc. In stage 1, we have obscuration of the nasal border of the disc. In stage 2, all the borders are obscured, and there is an elevation of the nasal border with a peripapillary halo. In stage 3, there is an increased diameter of the optic nerve head, and there is obscuration of segments of the major blood vessels. And in stage 4, there is a complete obscuration of a major blood vessel, elevation of the entire optic nerve head. And stage 5 is the last stage where there is a complete obliteration of the optic cup, and dome-shaped protrusions can be seen, which represent the expansion of the optic nerve head. So this is the modified Frisson's grading, which frequently are in the exams. The second thing is differentiation between a primary and optic atrophy. Now, primary optic atrophy appears as a chalky white disc with thinned out vessels. The secondary optic atrophy has a dirty gray appearance. And one question asked is the Kestenbaum count. Now, this is the number of capillaries which are observed on the optic disc, or the optic nerve head. The normal count of vessels is usually approximately 10. In case of an optic atrophy, be it a primary or a secondary, the number of capillaries reduces to less than 6. And in early stages of papilledema, when we have a hyperemic disc, the count is usually more than 12 because of the congestion. So the differences we are all well aware of. This is the only extra point which I thought I should mention about the Kestenbaum count. The last part of the examination is the light reflex. Now this is overlapping with the third nerve, nerve, and the Edinger-Westphal nuclei is the relay center in the brainstem, and the efferent is the third nerve. So we'll just have a look at the pathway of the light reflex. If this is the left eye, if it enters left eye, the light is the nasal and the temporal fibers, causing stimulation of these Edinger-Westphal nuclei or bilaterally. Through this Edinger-Westphal nuclei, the efferents are carried by the third nerve. The third nerve, they reach the ciliary ganglion, and from the ciliary ganglion, it goes to posterior, which supplies the sphincter pupillae, which causes a constriction, which is seen as the efferent of the light reflex of the pupil. So when we examine the light, the individual eyes have to be tested initially for the direct light reflex, and then both the eyes for a consensual light reflex. The room should be dark. The light should be at an oblique angle and not bang on from the front. A white light is preferred. Now, light reflex has also been graded from 0 to 4+. 4+ is a very brisk response, which is normally seen in all individuals, and grade 0 is no response. 3 is like 3, 2, and 1 are very subjective. 3 has been reported as a moderate light reflex, 2 is sluggish, and 1 is just transient contraction of the pupil, which is difficult to appreciate. Now, whenever we put the light in the eye, even if so, there is an immediate brisk contraction of the pupil followed by slight relaxation. This is known as the pupillary escape, which is normal. First, we put the light in maybe right eye, and we see for the constriction of the pupil, and the shape, size, everything is noted, which forms a part of the third nerve. And if the constriction is present, that means both the afferent and the efferent for the ipsilateral eye. Then we examine the contralateral eye for the consensual light reflex while the light is still being put on the same eye. So we've already discussed in our clinics as to if we don't get a ipsilateral light reflex and a contralateral reflex, where is the second nerve involved, or where is the third nerve involved. So I'll not go into it. The only thing is, before doing the light reflex, we must be really sure that the patient has not had and received any mydriatic, especially in ICU patients, because this can give rise to lots of troubles. So I'll just mention some of the surgical approaches to. Now these approaches are basically.
अपूर्व,
हाँ बोलना.
Sorry, ये meeting in 2.5 minutes खत्म होने वाला है. So
अपग्रेड होएगा ना?
2 मिनट में हो जाएगा. मैंने एक already link.
Usually gets upgraded.
नहीं, upgrade to pro बोल रहा है.
अच्छा ऐसा है क्या?
हाँ, so I'll end meeting over here. मैंने और एक link डाला है group पे. वो link पे I'll start the meeting and you continue over there. Okay?
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank
Okay.
you.